could have given up, but you didn't. You could have stopped believing, but you didn't. You could have kept living their expectations, but you decided to make this life your own. And in turn, you're here. Hello everyone, today we're meeting Catherine Llewellyn. She is a writer, a podcast host. Also, she is a Master Humanistic Practitioner and Executive Coach. Hello, Catherine. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Anna. It's an absolute delight to be here with you.
Thank you. So let's start our conversation by diving into your personal journey of becoming the person you are today. What led you to discover your true passion in life? How did it start for you?
I think it started because my parents were quite unusual people, and they thought it was perfectly all right to talk to their children as if their children were intelligent and mature people that could have a conversation, which was quite unusual at the time in the 1950s when I was born, because in those days people would speak to children as if they were, stupid and very slow. So I had a real advantage in that sense of being exposed to all sorts of philosophical ideas and notions and quite alternative ways of looking at things because of my parents. And I very quickly noticed that this seemed quite uncommon around us. A lot of people were really just trying to sort of feel okay, be comfortable, not really try and be very enlightened or very curious. And I thought that was a shame. So right from being a child, I was very interested in the whole question of how can we really be alert and awake and conscious and interested and real in life. So I think that started very, very early on. I had no idea what it was going to turn into in terms of my work, but that kind of emerged as time went on. Probably in my early adulthood, I realized that I could actually make a living helping people to connect more with themselves and be more real and be more satisfied.
Wow, yeah, that's interesting because like you said, usually we separate ourselves if it's an adult and a child, we kind of like treat our children as if they don't know anything. But in most of the cases, they connected more than we are to their true self, and they actually don't have any, I would say, resistance to that energy that's flowing through them. And we always know how they feel. They don't have a problem showing us, expressing themselves fully. But still, we are, kind of separate ourselves and trying to teach them. And sometimes we teach them something that, maybe it's not really beneficial in terms of life skills. And with you being exposed to a different type of upbringing, it really gave you an advantage over others. And now you emerged into a person who meant to be, teaching others and helping others to find their own true self. So I just want you to elaborate more on the work that you do in terms of executive coaching and helping people to elevate to the next level of their personal development. What kind of techniques you use, and just share with us what are they so we can know.
Okay, well, I've done a lot of study and exploration over the years. So, and each time I studied something new, I would focus on that quite significantly. And so I was very clear I was using it in the work. But now when I'm working with people, I'm not really consciously bringing in certain techniques any longer. It's all kind of integrated into one thing. But over the years, I've studied things like NLP, psychosynthesis, human energy and how that works, humanistic psychology, conscious movement and body work, the chakra system and how energies work around that, energy healing, physical health and wellness. My father was actually an alternative practitioner, so I learned a lot from him right from the beginning. So there's a whole number of things I've really explored over the years and really delved into each one as I went along. But now, if you were to watch me working with a client, you wouldn't be able to say, that's a bit of an LP, that's a bit of psychosynthesis. It would just seem just like a conversation. So, and this is because, I'm in my 60s now, so I've had plenty of time to integrate things as I've gone along. But when I first tried things, and I forgot as well, communication skills work. We did a lot of that back in the day. It's a whole range of things. But really what it comes down to is most of the time we're having conversations. We're working. You mentioned about the next level. Mm-hmm. People say, well, what do you mean by the next level? What is that? And something that's very interesting is often people find it difficult to identify what the next level is for them, particularly if they're already well established and successful and comfortable and things are going well for them. But there's like an itch inside them that they know there's a capacity for more, a bit like an athlete, I suppose, who realizes I could jump higher. And everyone's saying, but you already jump higher than everybody else. And they go, yeah, but I know I could jump higher, right? Right. There's that feeling that people have, because I think we're all programmed naturally in our design to naturally want to grow. And when we're younger, it's easier to see where we want to grow to. I want to get the house. I want to get a certain kind of job. I want to get to a certain kind of income. I want to pay off my student loan. I want to get past my awkwardness with the opposite sex. I want to find my life partner. All these things people want. But then they reach a point where they go, I've got all those things. Mm-hmm. So now what? And they know. So what is the next thing? What's the next level when you don't have to find the next level? What's the next level by choice? Because so many people are motivated by what they want to get away from, what they want to fix, what's wrong and how do I make that better? But what if there's nothing wrong? Everything's fine. So then what's the next level? So I've developed a program whereby somebody can, working with me and also working on their own and with other people in their lives with my guidance, they can identify what the next level is for them that really, really fits for them and that is different from everybody else's next level. And that's a really very exciting piece of work, because they suddenly say, oh, God, that is what I want. And I think I could have that, and it's going to be a stretch. So I'm going to have to work at it, but I think I can do it. And that would be amazing. Mm-hmm. So that's a very, very interesting exploration. I was talking to someone the other day and he said, well, I should really just sit down and work out what I want. Mm. I said, well, have you tried to do that before? He said, I've been trying on and off for like 2 years. How's it going? Not very well. I can't quite, because we're so conditioned in this world to be just concentrating on fixing what's wrong. Right. And just concentrating on progress. But we're not, certainly in the UK, we're very much educated to fit in, go for the same thing everyone else is going for. We're not really encouraged and educated to look at what is it we individually really want, particular to us.
Right. And not just in UK, here also in the United States, I've noticed how people comparing themselves to others, and they also, of course, competitive in nature, but they trying to get what other people have, and it might not be, what they need in their personal development, and it's not going to give them the same type of fulfillment that for another person. And like you mentioned, you have to find out what is next level for you personally, individually, because we all have our unique gifts and talents and skills, and we need to explore and connect more with our authentic, nature of what is it, our potential that we can, tap into and express ourselves in a more natural way. And that's where we see more success that will follow that path. But in order for us to recognize that, it's requires us to commit certain practices, and maybe even find practitioners that will help us, because a lot of times we don't see ourselves that, like you said, we in that conditioning and maybe some kind of thinking pattern that's happening on the background that we don't catch, and we don't know that it's running our life, and that's what limiting us. And this is how we live, by autopilot. And with us kind of become mindful and aware and getting understanding that, you know, this is what exactly stops us from pursuing further in our, you know, development. That's very important step that we need to take. So what are your thoughts on maybe some kind of daily habits that people could integrate in their lives to become more aware and mindful of what are they thinking about?
Well, there are quite a few daily habits that I've heard about and that I've tried. One of my favorites is journal writing. I write in my journal every day after breakfast. And I've done it in a structured way, and I've done it in an unstructured way. And I find both very useful. At the moment, at this point in my life, I'm doing it in a fairly unstructured way, where I literally start by writing down how I'm feeling in that moment. Mm-hmm. You know, do I feel well rested? Do I feel a bit tired? Do I feel irritated? Do I feel kind of heavy? Do I feel energized? You know, really describing how I'm feeling. And I keep writing until I reach the point where I feel satisfied I've expressed it on the page. And that might be very quick, or it might take several minutes to do that. And I sort of tracking, am I a bit like if you're talking with a really good friend and you share with them about how you're feeling, and it reaches the point where you go, yeah, I've shared this now, you know, I've said it. And sometimes it takes a long time, sometimes it's very quick. And I then kind of move on to just kind of reviewing the previous day, how I feel about the previous day, you know, the experiences I had and what I learned maybe. And then I kind of, usually I look out of the window at that point and I write something about what I see out of the window, or what I see around me in the room, and how I feel about it. I have cats. And sometimes one of my cats by this point in time has interrupted me, jumped up on my lap and is rubbing my face or something. So I then go into a whole experience of what that feels like. And I often write about that in the journal, because that's all part of me coming home to my actual experience in that moment. You know, or I'll look at the sky and write about the sky and how that feels for me. And sometimes I look outside and the colors are really extreme. And that hits me and that affects me. Or sometimes it's very muted. So, you know, so I just kind of really explore how I am. And then I might think about my day. You know, is there something I'd really love for today? Or do I really want to just be in the present, be in the flow? You know, and that whole process takes me about 10 minutes every morning. And that's a very, very good daily habit. And another very good daily habit is to go for a walk, and without listening to a podcast, without talking to somebody on the phone, and just tune into nature, tune into the feeling of the body walking and breathing and walking and breathing, and looking at the sky and the trees and feeling the feet on the earth, and that whole experience of moving through and just letting go and finding that place where time doesn't seem to exist. And then coming back and just noticing, I feel different. I feel different. So that there are many, many really good habits. And my advice to people is to find out about as many as you can, and then just literally try them. And if there's one that immediately is very helpful, just follow it. If there's one that immediately is a bit difficult, it might be worth trying it a bit more, because the difficulty might mean it's a really powerful growth experience for you, right? Just try it a bit more. If it still just doesn't really meet, then just do something else and maybe come back to that other one another time.
Right. Yeah, that's a very beneficial type of practices we can incorporate in a daily life. And I think it's important to find a way to be present, whatever it means for every one of us and whatever works for each one of us. We have to find a way to come back to that present moment. And with journaling and coming outside, connecting to nature. And I also like this exercise of savoring, when you look around you and you notice something that you like, and you really like take time and, you know, see the beauty in that and really appreciate that. So with us connecting to nature, I think we're more in a state of grace and seeing more abundance around us and being grateful for what we have right now. And again, we're not really escaping that moment, not going to the past or being anxious about the future, but really finding the power in now, which is important because that's how we can also change what we want in our life. If we are saying that we are the creator of our own experiences, that's how we have to, change in terms of coming back to that present moment. Don't you think so?
I completely agree. 100%. 100%.
And with us, to also an important part is to take responsibility for all of the choices that we make in our life. And a lot of times we kind of like find excuses or trying to blame circumstances or other people for what's happening. But again, to kind of realize that we are the ones created what we have so far. And again, we haven't the power to change if we are not satisfied with what we have, is important factor to notice, because again, if we don't realize that, it's in a way like we're giving away our power and we're being in a victim mindset. And I would like you to maybe give some kind of advice to how people can reconnect with their inner power and take that responsibility of their life.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I was sort of thinking about this earlier on and realizing that when things happen in our lives, we learn from it at the time. And then later on, we learn from it in another way. And later on, we learn from it in yet another way. So something I think is very important for us to start off with is to admit to ourselves that we don't necessarily get the full lesson from something all in one go. We get different parts of the lesson as time goes on. So one part of my story, for example, is that when I was very young, when I was 10, very sadly, I lost my mother. She passed away. Now, when that first happened, my immediate response to that was to take a lot more responsibility in the home and in the family. So I became very helpful. I was the eldest. I was, helping my father. And that was a very powerful learning for me, which was about loyalty and support and being in service and coming from a place of love. Very, very powerful. So that was a piece of power that grew in me in that moment. What I didn't realize at that time was that there was another thing going on, which was to do with grieving. I was too young to recognize that that was something that needed to be done. So it wasn't till later on in life, in my early 20s, that I realized that there was some kind of grieving I needed to do for the loss of my mother. So I then embarked on some grieving, which I actually engaged a practitioner to help me to do it, because it was a difficult thing for me to do, because I developed this really strong, resilient independence, from the response, the initial response, which was very powerful for me. But then I realized there was another side for me to explore. So I explored that vulnerability, the loss, the sadness, the grieving, and we actually acted out a little funeral for her, especially for me to be able to do that. I got a new piece of power from that, which was more to do with what you might call the feminine energy power.
Mhm.
Whereas the first time I developed more like the masculine energy power, the resilient, supportive, whereas now I developed more of the feminine aspect power. But you see, there's a long gap in between. There's maybe 10, 15 years between those two pieces of learning. And then it wasn't until years later that I then realized other things around that to do with there are things I have in me that came from my mother, which I didn't realize that until I was in my 30s or 40s. And then I could explore that and say, what are these qualities I have that came from her that I had previously discounted and not really considered because I was so young when she passed. And I sort of assumed I probably hadn't picked up very much from her. I was completely wrong about that. So something that's very useful to do is to pause at any point in our lives and say to ourselves, what's the power I've already gained from things that have happened in my life in the past? And if I revisit some of those things, what's the new piece of power I can now develop in relationship to that particular thing? And how can that also inform me in terms of in the present day, like in my day, walking forward into any particular day, how can I be open and receptive to whatever that day is offering me in terms of my growth and my consciousness and my self-empowerment? So it's a very, very interesting thing to do. And we can only do that if we give ourselves permission to kind of learn at the pace that we learn, realize what we realize when we realize it. I mean, I used to have this thing where I would learn a new thing about myself and I would then beat myself up because I hadn't learned it earlier. And I thought, well, why didn't I learn that before? And then there came a point, literally probably in the last 15 years or so, when I suddenly thought, well, I didn't learn it before because I was too busy getting to the point where I'm ready to learn it now. I was on a path. You can't be at the end of the path when you're at the beginning or the middle of the path. So I think that's a very important thing for us, conversation for us to have with ourselves right at the beginning. And then to really look at those different things in our lives and say, what's that already given me? What did it give me at the time? What did it give me after that? And what's it giving to me now? And what can I now take in relationship to that?
Right. And I think you also mentioned how sometimes we beat ourselves up and, we're not compassionate with ourselves and being so judgmental. And again, we just need to take time because sometimes there is a reason for, why I didn't learn that particular lesson at that time in space, in past, but now maybe it is the perfect time for me to really grasp it and take it all in and realize something. So there is always a reason why we learn certain lessons at a particular moment in time. And we just need to accept that as, our own path to greatness, let's say. And like you said, reflecting on our past experiences and seeing what we've been taught through that experience and what power we gain through that, and seeing what is else for us to explore. It's very important, and we have to do it, on a regular basis, and maybe like have some kind of journaling or put in our thoughts, either maybe to talk somebody on, maybe like write it down and really see how we're feeling at the moment and what are we looking for in the future and what we're working on in the present moment in terms of healing and gaining that other piece of power that we are kind of like putting together as one. And again, I think we also need to find a way to forgive ourselves and others, whatever happened to us. Sometimes people go through, some difficult times in their lives. They have some kind of traumas, but they've been attached too much to it, and it really prevents them from allowing themselves to go forward. And they need to find a way to release that, to a way to forgive themselves and understand that you're a different person. You don't have to identify yourself with who you were, and you can learn from that experience, even if you feel like it's been painful for you, but there's always something to learn from. Don't you think so?
I completely agree. And I also think this is when I think about having a spiritual practice, because if we have a spiritual practice that really nourishes us and that feels meaningful to us, that can really help us to have a beautiful context for what we're experiencing and what we're doing in our lives. That can help us connect with a much, much larger sense of what's important for us, as opposed to just focusing on our own individual dramas and our own individual needs and issues and neuroses and everything. If we can connect to something much, much bigger than that, whatever kind of spiritual path we choose and that really meets us where we are and that really calls us, that's something that's incredibly helpful. I mean, something I've really connected with people, we talk about empowerment quite a lot, and something people have said to me, that they've said, Catherine, how is it that you get the results with your clients? How do you get those results? How can you be powerful enough to do that? And my truthful answer is, it's not me that gets those results at all. It's actually a combination of the client and what you might call the source, universal energy, whatever you want to call it. It's not me that's doing that. Now, the fact that I know that means that I know there's no limit on what can be accomplished. Because if I thought I was the one who was doing it, that would place a limit on it, because I am limited by my own imagination and my own skills. But if what I'm doing is holding a space and facilitating in such a way that that person can expand in their own way, and that their expansion will be in some areas greater than mine, so they're not limited by my limitations, and equally they're connecting in with something that's much, much bigger than both of us, then you can get the most extraordinary results that are a surprise and a delight for everybody concerned. And that takes it beyond issues and concerns about whether or not I'm good enough or powerful enough or skillful enough or clever enough or impressive enough or any of those things, because then I'm in a place of actually in service to something that's much, much bigger than me, and on behalf of that client. So for me, what I've just described is one way of describing my connection with my spiritual path. But you can see in the way that I describe it that it gives me a lot of space and a lot of sense of possibility in what I'm doing, which is very, very good for my sense of rightness and possibility and ability to do something. And if you like, assurance that I'm going to stay connected to a good direction, because my ego doesn't really come into play when I'm in that kind of a space. I mean, I do have my moments when my ego really comes into play, right? But I don't do that when I'm working with clients. I do that in my own private situation, and my friends have to put up with that. Okay, so, but it's that whole spiritual connection and spiritual path, I think, is very, very helpful for people in terms of contextualizing experiences and growth and direction.
Yeah. And like you mentioned, you are being, I would say, like an instrument for that to happen, so people can feel that you hold in space for them, and everything that goes through you in terms of providing that type of energy that they need. And if they need any type of kind of feedback, you can provide to them, but also they know there are no limits to what they can accomplish. And understanding that we also connected to something bigger, some energy source that every one of us has the ability to tap into, that gives us freedom of what can be done. There are no limits, and the only limit we have in our own mind, and we limit ourselves in one way or another. But to recognize that we're more than what we see in the mirror, and there is non-physical part of us that exists. It's another way of kind of like realizing what kind of person I could become because of that, and how powerful I am, really.
That's exactly right. And it's a wonderful experience. It's also very humbling because, ultimately then it's not all about me being a star. It's about my client being a star and me being delighted by that. And that's very exciting.
Right. And also, if we were look to, some other people's successes and see what they could grow into, we should be happy for them. We should be cheerful for them, knowing that it's also possible for us. Because sometimes we develop that sense of jealousy, or we want something other people have, but we should look at it from a different perspective, knowing that if there is a possibility of that, that means you can do it too, but in your own way.
Yeah, it's very interesting because I did a little study on jealousy a while back, because I suddenly noticed I was in a piece of time where I was just feeling a bit envious of people, of things that people had. And I looked at the things that they had and I said, do I really want those things? And well, oh no, I don't really want those things, but I feel envious of these people. So what's really going on? And I realized what was going on was that I was not completely happy with what I was doing in my life at that time. I wasn't fully engaged with my own path at that time. So what I was envious of was that it looked to me as though those people were connected to their path. I didn't want their path, but I wanted the feeling of being connected to my own path. And once I'd understood that, I could then regroup and say, great, put my energy into reconnecting with what's my path now. What is it that I want to be doing? And as soon as I managed to do that, suddenly you could offer me all sorts of things that people might think everybody wants. I said, no, I'm good. I'm here, right? I'm where I want to be, doing what I want to be doing, and I'm satisfied with that. And a day will come when I want something more, and then I'll regroup. I'll let go of some things. I'll bring on some more things. I'll expand, and that will happen. But that was a very good lesson for me about envy, which is not quite the same as jealousy, but they're kind of connected, aren't they?
Yes,
envy and jealousy, and it's a bit like if you see using the word jealousy, if you look at a couple walking along, they're very much in love, right? And you look at the couple and feel jealous, right? And I think, well, what is that jealousy for? Do I really want to date either of those two people? Not really. So what is it I'm jealous of? What I'm jealous of is that glow that they have, or that complete love they seem to be sharing, or the way they pay attention to each other, or the way they're carrying themselves because of how they feel really embodied in this beautiful connection. Okay, so that's what I want. I can have that whether or not I'm in a relationship. If I choose to embody that, I can choose to treat people in the way I see them treating each other. I can choose to receive that from other people if I'm open and present and receptive and taking responsibility, as you said earlier, taking responsibility for my own experience and how I'm showing up. And then when somebody does that, guess what? Suddenly they find themselves swimming in love and people who are interested in them, because suddenly they're magnetic and appealing and attractive because they've tapped into love and connection, which is just there all the time to be tapped into. So I think sometimes jealousy and envy and things are useful signposts to a bit of personal, growth, experience and exploration, don't you think?
Of course. And a lot of negative emotions that we feel, we have to ask ourselves, why am I feeling this way? What kind of signal or sign is that for me to look into what am I missing in my own, kind of empowerment. What is there something I need to work on that reflects back to me? And that's a piece of information, because sometimes we react to that not knowing what that really means.
Yeah.
And then, something could be done unintentionally, and we keep reproducing the same type of reaction in the future, maybe with different circumstances, right? But it's another way for us to really learn and help ourselves to heal, maybe, and release what needs to be released. And like you said, tap into maybe love or some other emotion that we didn't experience before, and help ourselves to get that type of feeling that we are angry or jealous about.
Yeah, absolutely right. Yes. So it's back to that same thing of pausing and acknowledging and accepting and admitting the experience we're actually having in the moment. I mean, people chase all over the world trying to find answers, whereas if they just sat still and breathed and looked within for long enough to get over the voice in the head which says this is stupid, and got to the point of actually feeling what they're feeling, that provides so much information about how we are now, how we feel about it, what we want, where we want to go. Another thing I think is wonderful is anything that helps get really in touch with the body. So I went to a yoga class this morning. Over here, it's 5 hours later than it is where you are. So I've already done my yoga class this morning, and it's a beautiful opportunity to really connect with the body and the breath. And my yoga teacher is very spiritual in the way that she does it. And she often brings a little philosophical, spiritual theme into the class and invites us to reflect on that while we're doing the postures. And that gets me really connected to my body, which reminds me that my body is actually miraculous. It's just miraculous, the bodies that we have. And it just reminds me of who I am and what I'm about. And it gives me a fresh energy. I also do conscious dance, which has a similar effect. I can suddenly discover my body doing all these movements I'd never seen it do before. And I'm thinking, wow, this is great. Energy is moving and I'm rolling on the floor, or I'm dancing around, or whatever I'm doing. And there's this wonderful feeling of being connected to life. There's one other thing I just remembered. I was reading a book, which it's a science fiction book, okay? And in this book, there are two people having a conversation about dolphins. And which I don't know why they were doing this in a science fiction book, but anyway, they're talking about dolphins. And this woman says that there's a theory that because dolphins are so well adapted to their environment, they don't have to be building buildings all the time. They don't have to be making money. They don't have to be, there's lots of things they don't have to do because they're perfectly adapted to their environment. So the theory she was talking about was that they have all the time in the world for play. And that play for them is a spiritual practice. Wow. And these songs they create are like a spiritual practice. And because they barely ever sleep, dolphins apparently, they're in like a dream state all the time with this beautiful dream song and this beautiful spiritual practice, which is all about play. Now, I've no idea if any of that is true, okay, but it's a beautiful story. And obviously they're telling the story in the book so that the reader is thinking, wow, could I be more like that? Could I be more connected to the spirit of play and allowing that to come into my song of life?
Yes. And a lot of times we're not allowing ourselves to have that play in our life. We're all about, going to work. It's always stressful for us and we're always thinking about what's next. But how about just pausing for a moment, take time and find what you love to do, whatever it is, dance or yoga or what else gives you that pleasure, and
Mm.
just give yourself that time. Again, if you want to do it at least a few times a week, but really reconnect with your playfulness, like you're like a child, just doing what you like without thinking about, why you're doing it, or, time that it takes for you to do it, or any of that stuff. Just put it aside and be in that moment and see what it brings you. Because I feel it's important to dedicate that time for us to really feel that joy.
Yes, exactly. And of course, that joy then puts all sorts of endorphins into our blood, which also opens up the brain and the mind and our imagination. And we're then much more creative. We're also much more enjoyable to be around, and things just run in a much more interesting way. So I think play is such an important thing for us to remember at the moment. So many of us are just much too serious, much too much of the time. And everyone's on the internet finding out about what's going on in, Ukraine or Uganda or Taiwan, all these places, and talking about it and how terrible it is and what should we be doing. And you think, well, okay, yeah, so you're a very good, virtuous person. I get it. Right. But what about your life? What about you experiencing your life? What about you giving an example to your children and your grandchildren? What about the example you're giving to the people in your business? What about how you're relating with your customers? How do they feel when they're around you? Do they come out feeling depressed, or do they come out feeling enlivened after meeting with you? So what are we bringing into the world? What are we feeding in the world? Is a whole question that I always ask myself. Where am I putting my energy? Would really be most helpful.
Right, because then people will sense your energy. It's not what you say, but people around you just will sense that vibration that you're emitting, and that's important. That creates that ripple effect, and that affects your professional and personal life. And with you giving yourself that time, really treating yourself, self-care is so important. And it's not for you being selfish, but it is critical. It's essential.
Yeah.
All of us should prioritize our mental, physical health and give ourselves time to really have that joyful experience regularly. And then we will see how everything will change naturally.
Yeah, it's exactly right. I mean, I know some people who are very clever, very resilient, strong people who think that because they can keep going without rest and without maybe having something to eat, that therefore they should. And we have long conversations where I say to them, just because you can do that doesn't mean it's the best thing to do. Because when you do that, you become exhausted. And when you become exhausted, being around you is a bit of a drain. We all still love you, right? But being around you, we're having to compensate for the fact that you're exhausted. Yeah. And that you keep forgetting things, or that you keep not being quite sure when something is supposed to be happening, and things like that, because you're not taking care of yourself. But when you do take care of yourself, I have a friend, she's one of my teachers and a friend, and she works in the realm of a very powerful energy technique. And she looks after herself beautifully. She's not self-indulgent with it. She looks after herself beautifully. She's done her yoga before breakfast. Beautiful nutrition, which is always delicious. She looks after herself in a way that she really enjoys. And she's got one of the sharpest minds I know. And she's got one of the most beautiful energies I know. And everyone who ever goes to visit her, when they come out, they feel like they've been to the spa for a month. Because they're just so relaxed and nourished just by being in this person's space. And she's a real example to me of that. And she doesn't make any fuss about it. There's no moaning and whinging and complaining, but she's been practicing it for a long time. So this is another thing, I think, to remind people, when we start to think about really caring for ourselves, we're going to be clumsy to begin with. You can't go from zero to a master just overnight. You can't do it. So you've got to incorporate it bit by bit and give yourself a break. If you get it wrong, or you suddenly discover nutritionally there's something that's bad for you and the fridge is full of it. Okay, you didn't know, right? So it's all right. Give it to somebody who is nourished by that thing and get something, again, that thing about pacing and allowing the time for the learning and allowing the time for changes in habits is just really, really important.
Yes, definitely. I agree. And I'm so glad that we had time today to meet. Thank you so much for your thoughts and wisdom. For those who would like to connect with you, how can they find you?
Well, I actually have a podcast of my own, which I'd love people to come and listen to. There are conversations a bit like this one we've been having today. There are also solo episodes where I talk about something I consider important and interesting. And it's called Truth and Transcendence. And it's based on the idea that when we find and connect with our truth, we can actually transcend. That's on all the usual places. And the "and" in transcendence is the squirrely ampersand. Truth and transcendence. I'll see you there, everybody.
Yes. And as closing, what would you like our listeners to focus on today?
Oh, wow. So what I would like our listeners today to do is to think about what was the idea they most enjoyed in this conversation today, and write that idea down and just have it with them through the day, and just come back to it and play with it during the day. Maybe talk to a friend about it, maybe make it into a picture, maybe meditate on it, maybe dance that idea, whatever your thing is, whatever your favorite idea was from this conversation. Just run with that for today.
It's beautiful. Thank you so much. I hope you enjoy your day.
Thank you so much, and the same to you, Anna.
I hope you enjoyed this episode, and if you did, hit the subscribe button and share it with others. Stay tuned.